I'm Jack.
I'm Blake.
And we're going to do a presentation on financial policies and government policies that apply to abroad and help shape our financial system. Okay, so the main problem that we're going to talk about that's going to be recurring is the agency problem, which is a conflict of interest in any relationship where one party is expected to act in line with best interests. So kind of like, for example, historically banks that didn't act in the best interest of their investment accounts with their clients, so they would go ahead and invest funds without the knowledge in risky derivatives that the clients know about. That's one example. And basically, and it can also be a high level conflict of interest between management and the company's shareholders as well, not just for clients.
So a large part of the agency problem is the fact that many shareholders are not qualified to make complex business decisions. And with that, they may not have the time with a largely diversified portfolio. So with this, shareholders allocate decision-making authority to the managers, which is why managers are hired in the first place.
And so in governance and the public corporation, the key issues are that a weakness in the conflict of interest between managers and shareholders. And in principle, shareholders elect a board of directors who hire and fire the managers who actually run the company, when in reality, management-friendly insiders often dominate the board of directors with relatively few outside directors who can independently pursue management.
So in continuation of this, in the case of Enron and other dysfunctional corporations, the boards of directors grossly fail to safeguard shareholder interests. And furthermore, once you diffuse your shareholder ownership, most shareholders have a strong enough incentive to basically incur the cost of monitoring management themselves. For example, PG&E, a lot of talk now is about will the shareholders take over, or some private institution coming in, and so yeah, that's kind of what happens.
So the agency problem at Enron deals with the fact that Enron had about 3,500 subsidiaries and affiliates, which were many of these were run and partly owned by Enron executives. And the question had to have been asked, where did the executives' interests lie? Were they loyal? Were they more concerned with their personal finances versus that of the companies?
And so another way to alleviate the agency problem is to concentrate the shareholdings. And in the United States and United Kingdom, concentrated ownership is pretty rare. And in other parts of the world, concentrated ownership is pretty normal.
And here's a list of a couple of big Western, Euro, EMEA countries that in the rule of law index basically ranks them on that system. So at the top you have Canada, Australia, a lot of North American countries. I think the United States, 10 on there. United Kingdom 8.57, and then a lot of the Asian countries have much lower rankings.
So the differences in legal protection of investors, a lot of it is different between English common law and French civil law. The English common law is so much more protective of investors because the state has historically played a more active role in regulating economic activities and has been less protective of property rights in civil law countries and commonwealth.
And so now debt, if managers fail to pay interest and principal to creditors, the company can be forced into bankruptcy and managers may lose their jobs. And borrowing can have a major disciplinary effect on managers, motivating them to curb private benefits and wasteful investments and trim bloated organizations. However, excessive debt creates its own agency problems.
Yeah, so one big giant act that came in early 2000s was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which brought with it a lot of accounting regulation reform. One of the main keys was you had to have an independent audit committee. And firms have their own internal audit committees, but you also needed to get it double checked by someone who's external and allegedly independent. Many companies, of course, this costs money, so not all like it. And so a lot of firms, the consequence of this was they would list their stocks on different stock exchanges around the world that didn't require these kinds of commitments. For example, the LSE.
So the CFA's ethical and professional standards for corporate governance, a lot of it deals with the board and whether they're independent, are the directors qualified, do they have access to outside resources, how are they elected, ensuring that it was an ethically conducted way, and then do do any directors have cross-company relationships? That can be a big problem for a lot of companies. So basically it's the question, are they cozy with management? And for management, do they have a code of ethics? Are there a lot of prerequisites, and how is their compensation structured?
And so the Cadbury Code of Best Practice is an ethical standard without the force of law. And however, the LSC requires listed firms to either comply or explain why they can't comply. And about 90% of the LSC listed firms comply with the code.
Some of the criteria of the code are that executives have to meet regularly, on a regular basis. I believe it's quarterly, and must retain full executive control of the company, and monitor executive management. Boards of directors these days, it's difficult sometimes to do that because a lot of the officials, a lot of the people to the board can be elected, and not necessarily they're not necessarily the best people sometimes. Could be they don't have the experience. Could be that they're friends of the CEO and they don't want to tarnish their reputation with them. So oftentimes when the CEOs mess up or screw up, sometimes the board doesn't quite do its job regulating them and making sure there's a check and balance in that system.
The Dodd-Frank Act was passed in reaction to the recession of 2007 through 2009. The Volcker rule, deposits taking banks will be banned from proprietary trading and from owning more than a small fraction of hedge funds and private equity firms. The resolution authority, the government can seize and dismantle a large bank if the bank faces impending failure.
And so continue the derivatives, OTC derivatives trading will move to electronic exchanges with contracts settled through a clearinghouse. And systematic risk regulation is systematically important firms will be identified and their financial condition will be monitored. And consumer protection, a new independent consumer financial protection bureau will be set up to monitor mortgages and other loan products.
So in summary, back to the core problem being the agency problem. Some ways you can alleviate this is by strengthening the independence of your board, and you can also fix your executive management's compensation to performance metrics, not necessarily related to stock price, stock-based compensation. And a lot of companies, for example, in the healthcare insurance space, try this by having long-term goals, which says like if you grow sales at X%, then we'll compensate you based on that, which makes a lot more sense for a company rather than share price, which can act independently of fundamentals. And lastly, you can use debt managers to disgorge free cash flows to investors. That is pretty extreme, but that is one line of doing it. You can also, inviting hostile takeover bids, that's even more extreme actually. Yeah, I would stick with the former. I think that's good though. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That was it. That was kind of a weak clap. So, yeah.
That's what we're working on today. Because you're right, as we had to redo it because I did all foreign listed stocks and foreign exchanges instead of foreign ADRs. So we're doing that today. We'll have it by Monday.
Okay, perfect. Was that right? And then he's gonna start.
Next Friday?
Yeah.
The other person. And then just the stuff.
Yeah. Sure. Good question.
No, just stock charts. No, those two, it doesn't. And then, yeah,
All right, I'm Jake.
I'm
Anthony. And today we're going to be presenting Chapter 5 and going over the basics of the market for foreign exchange. So the foreign exchange market is a two-tiered market. First, the interbank market, which is wholesale, has about 100 to 200 banks worldwide ready to make a market in the foreign exchange. The non-bank dealers account for about 40% of it. And then the there are foreign exchange brokers who match and buy and sell orders but don't carry inventory. And then the other part is the client market or the retail market. And then market participants include international banks, their customers, non-bank dealers, foreign exchange brokers, and central banks.
Large commercial banks maintain demand deposits for one another, which helps the foreign exchange market function. And for note, a demand deposit is an account where a bank basically holds enough money for its depositors to come and take it out on a whim.
So international commercial banks communicate with each other using SWIFT, which stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. CHIPS, which is Clearinghouse Interbank Payment System, and then ECHO, Exchange Clearing House Limited, the first global clearinghouse for several interbank foreign exchange transactions.
So here's a couple basic terms for foreign exchange. A direct quotation is basically the US dollar equivalent. So if you said something like a Japanese yen is worth about a penny, that's a direct quotation. And an indirect quotation is basically the opposite of that. So it's the price of the US dollar in the foreign currency. So for example, a dollar is worth 100 yen.
So the bid-ask spread, the price is the price the dealer is willing to pay you for something. The ask price would be how much the dealer wants you to pay. And the ask spread is the difference between the two.
Another term is the market microstructure, which refers to the mechanics of how the currency marketplace works. And insofar as the bid-ask spreads in the spot market, the bid-ask spread increases with foreign exchange rate volatility. So basically, if you're using a volatile currency to trade for another one, the dealer is going to ask for more. And then it also, the bid-ask spread decreases with dealer competition. So basically, dealers are going to try to beat the prices of other dealers so they can remain competitive in the foreign exchange market. Another thing is private information on behalf of the investor that can help you get a better deal.
So the forward market for foreign exchange involves agreements to buy and sell foreign currencies in the future at prices agreed upon. Bank quotes for 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12 month maturities, and they're all available for forward contracts, and the longer term swaps are available also.
So when you do a forward exchange, you'll oftentimes have to pay a premium or a discount, and the way that's determined is by the interest rate differential. So for example, let's say the euro is appreciating from 1.13 euros to 1.1389 euros, then the below formula lays this out for you. So it's basically forward value minus spot value, current value, over current value to get the percent difference in value, and then that's cross-referenced with how many days forward you're trying to do the exchange.
So if you've agreed to sell anything, then that's for spot or forward, then that's a short. And if you've agreed to buy anything forward or spot, then you're a long. Which means if you sell a foreign exchange forward, then you're shorting, and if you've agreed to buy a foreign exchange forward, then you're long.
So not all currencies are exchangeable due to some government regulation. So for many of these currencies, there's a contract called a non-deliverable forward, and that allows you to kind of work around the regulations of the government. Typically, or always, a non-deliverable forward contract is settled in cash, usually in US dollars. The settlement is calculated by the difference between the forward price agreed to in the contract and the spot price at maturity of the contract multiplied by the contract size.
And then finally, every country has their own symbols for their currency, and then there's also, which are the examples up top, and then there's also the 3-letter codes that they use to define their currencies.
So another way to exchange currency is through a transaction called a swap. It's an agreement to provide the counterparty with something he or she wants in exchange for something that you want. Usually this takes place on a recurring basis every 6 months or for 5 years. That's one way you can do it. Swap transactions began in the 70s, and since then it's grown to be 56% of interbank foreign exchange trading. So it's become big. And swaps are fully covered in Chapter 14 if you want to learn more. But in summary, a foreign exchange swap is a simultaneous purchase and sale of identical amounts of one currency for another with 2 different value dates. And this is done to offset the foreign exchange risk.
So exchange traded currency funds, the individual shares are denominated in the US dollar and trade on the New York Stock Exchange. And we would consider a exchange traded fund where each share represents 100 euros. The price of one share at any point in time will reflect the spot dollar value of 100 euros plus the interest minus the expenses. And 6 additional currency trusts exist in the Australian dollar, British pound sterling, Canadian dollar, the Mexican peso, Swedish krona, and then the Swiss franc. And the currency is now recognized as distinct asset class, like stocks or bonds, and the currency ETFs facilitate investing in these currencies. And that's it.
Done. Thanks. You're the only person that listened.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
You probably want to use your blue book for this. And I already handed you out the 2 presentations. First one I'm going to do. There's 2 presentations, and these will. First one's on institutional research foundations for emerging securities and real estate capital markets. The second one is the nature and management of foreign exchange risk. These will help, especially this one will help in the question on the quiz. The paper that I wrote on foreign direct investment, the regression analysis. And then this paper will help you with your first question on the exam that talks about what are the factors that drive foreign exchange rate volatility, foreign exchange rate movements, yes.
You have another blue book.
I might not, because I didn't bring everything today. I was a little, I was in kind of a hurry. Oh, here I go. Anybody else? The blue books are right there. I think I brought like 4 of them. I think those guys over there. Do you have, Reginald, can you give one to those guys too? Oh, is the exam in there?
Yeah, and one of them.
Is that 135 or 123 or 136?
123.
Okay, so just pull that out. Okay, so let's do this presentation first. So let me tell you the motivation behind this paper. At least a few times I've been asked to put together a research strategy for companies that want to go global. Okay, so the first thing before companies go global is you really have to understand the institutional foundations associated with entering global markets, because there's a lot of risks and stuff. Okay, Ruben, it's all about you. What's up?
I have a question. Do you want us to write on this or the blue book? You don't care.
I don't care.
Okay.
So again, if you're going to be investing in global REIT securities, if you're going to be investing in global real estate on a global basis, if you're going to be conducting foreign direct investment into foreign countries, you need to understand the institutions and the institutional frameworks around these countries. And the real question at the end of the day is, how developed are they? Because the country risk is the biggest risk when you move into these countries. The United States is the most developed country in the world, so that when you go overseas, you're taking on significantly more risk. And how do you analyze the markets before you enter these countries? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the institutional foundations for efficient capital markets, prerequisites for efficient security markets, prerequisites for efficient real estate markets, the role of the institutional investor in allocation of capital. And I think this part right here might be what you guys are probably the most interested in, because I was asked to basically design a research vertical for the company. Okay, if we're going global, what does the research vertical look like, and how does the research department add value in the strategic decision making, the asset management, and exit strategies? So this is basically you guys. Okay, these are you guys. So before you enter a market, you have to change your philosophy or your ideology to really understand that it's not that easy. You're not just going into a market to pick stocks or to pick locations to build properties. You have to completely assess the institutions in which these countries, in which these cultures are actually, built on. So you have to understand their financial systems, particularly their capital markets. Are they efficient? Are they liquid? Are they broad? Are they deep? Can they clear? Are they large enough to be able to create efficiency and to be able to create access and opportunities to raise low-cost capital? You have to understand the economic systems associated with the individual countries. You have to understand their economic systems. Are they pure liberal capitalist systems, or are they more social democratic or social welfare states, such as Nordic states? Are they corporatist states, such as France and Germany? What are the economic and social regimes in which these countries actually operate in? You have to understand that too. You have to understand the political systems. Are they democratic systems? Are they authoritarian systems? Are they parliamentary monarchies? How are the actual policies and the politics governed? I mean, it's pretty easy. In China, you have one party, one guy that runs the show, basically. In other countries, it's a little bit more dynamic and it's a little bit different. And you have to understand the political risks associated with politics and policy formation, because they could have direct or indirect impact on the value of your portfolios. You have to understand the legal systems and the rule of law and contract enforcement before you enter into these countries. I know 20, 30 years ago, when some of my friends were entering China, particularly on the industrial side, one of my friends was he was the president of a cement manufacturing company that entered China. Their company got taken by the Chinese government. So you have to understand the legal systems. You got to understand the philosophical systems too, the ethics and the morality, the theocracies that permeate and actually govern the social structure and the governing structure. So they all have influences. So efficient global and real estate securities capital markets require strong public and private sector cooperation, disclosure of government and corporate financial conditions, and institutional and individual investor confidence in both the financial and the political system. If I go overseas and this hypothesis is violated, I'm putting my company and my capital to risk. And if it changes, if any of these change, again, it puts up more risk, it makes it harder to conduct not only the operations, but investment decisions. First, you need clear determination and communication of economic and political goals. So you need a fiscal policy, monetary policy, and government communication constantly providing you with the information that you need to be able to make investment decisions. So clear communication is important coming from the top. You need government commitment to long-term financial stability. The problem with entering like Brazil and Argentina is you had hyperinflation due to excessively over-accommodated fiscal and monetary policy. You can't operate a business overseas if you have hyperinflation that you're confronting, or volatility in currency exchange rates, or volatility in the capital markets. I can't go into those countries because I can't manage in those types of environments. And monetary and fiscal policies that promote capital formation, privatization, progressive tax systems is what you need. You need price stability promoting consumer confidence and savings. You need the savings from your domestic population, and if you don't, you need foreign direct investment. If you do have the savings have to be then deployed through the financial institutions as loans to businesses that will actually pay off and not be defaulted on. You need privatization and securitization of new and used capital stock. This is a great subject area for somebody who hasn't picked their paper yet. Looking at historical privatization and securitization trends. Privatization from a closed economy, government-run corporations, to privatization and securitization for capital market development to be able to channel foreign capital through your capital markets that then could be deployed by the corporations for plant and equipment and other types of capital formation, but also business formation. You also need standardized reporting systems for examination. You need an international GAAP, which is what we already have, but you need a standardized international GAAP, which is what we have. And actually the GAAP accounting rules here in the United States are moving more towards the international standard as the world becomes more global. Efficient global security markets require a strong macroeconomic infrastructure based on the enforcement of private property rights. So the macroeconomic infrastructure is the central bank and also the financial institutions. The enforcement of private property rights is enforcement, law enforcement, clearly defined rights of ownership, not only through securities in the corporations, but also private property right enforcement due to title where I can go overseas and actually buy a fee interest in a property and actually own the rights of that property. And if anybody or the government tries to take my property, I have redress through the legal system. Based on precedent or based on legal philosophy. You need an accepted medium of exchange for low-cost investment transactions. If the currency is highly volatile because they don't have these institutional factors that are creating stable exchange rates and liquid exchange rates, the transaction costs associated with transacting in those currencies and in those countries become too high and infeasible. You need strong macroeconomic infrastructure consisting of a developed legal system, contract law, corporate law, securities law. You need standardized accounting and disclosure requirements, obviously international GAAP. You need equitable and efficient regulatory tax system, a progressive tax system. Obviously you need either voluntary or quasi-voluntary reporting of corporate and personal income for taxation, because you need the tax receipts to basically plow into infrastructure and to provide services to corporations and individuals as you grow rapidly within the country. And you need government oversight of public and private financial institutions and markets to avoid adverse selection, asymmetric information, and moral hazard. This is everybody understand what asymmetric information is?
Wrong.
Yeah, you're not getting, it's opaque, you get wrong information, so you're basing business decisions based off of wrong information, which is extremely costly. Do you know what adverse selection is?
They're not willing to pick it?
Huh?
Not willing to pick?
Adverse selection is you pick a credit, let's say you pick a credit, and you, based on the information that you were given, you picked the wrong credit. So you funded a loan to the wrong company that had actually lower credit than they actually reported. So you adversely selected that company and lent that loan. Then the other one is the moral hazard. What's moral hazard? I'm a bad credit, I get the loan from the bank, and I basically behave badly once I get the loan. So I misappropriate the loans and use the loans for something other than to build a real estate, the manufacturing facility. So the behavior, you weren't doing a good job because of asymmetric information, you weren't conducting your underwriting appropriately. And most of it is based on bad information. You need an independent central banking system that are trying to achieve these goals. One is price stability, interest rate stability, currency stabilization, and the central bank has to be the lender and the market maker of last resort during financial crises or economic recessions. If there's a violation in any of these, you're going to get price instability, interest rate instability, and currency instability or volatility. Again, I can't operate in those types of environments unless there are maybe risk management tools such as futures and options and swaps and derivatives. But again, in countries that are underdeveloped, they're not going to have derivative contracts to be able to use as risk management tools when you enter the market. You need financial liberalization. Again, this is another great topic. You need a convertible currency. This is one of the biggest problems with entering foreign markets is the economies aren't large enough and haven't developed or been developed long enough to create liquidity in the currency. So you get volatility in the currency because of the lack of liquidity. Ownership rights. Again, you need clearly defined corporate ownership rights and real estate ownership rights. When you buy a security, when you buy a stock, that basically is a standardized contract that clearly lays out the private property rights that you have just purchased and your ownership interest in the corporation. And again, when you buy a piece of real estate, you need the fee, you need the title to the land. It needs to be recorded. And you, as the purchaser, it needs to transfer from the seller to the buyer efficiently, and it needs to be recorded. And the private property rights enforced if anybody tries to take your property. And then you need privatization and securitization. A lot of these, if you look at Brazil, you look at Russia, you look at Southeast Asia, when they started to move from command and control closed economies to open global, more socialistic or democratic societies, they privatized and securitized their industries and their companies. And I believe that this is the biggest opportunity for China going forward, because a lot of the corporations are government owned. They need injections of liquidity into their capital markets. They're going to have to start converting to privatization and securitization and allow foreign capital and multinationals into China to basically restructure their economy. If they don't, there could be some major issues. And that's some of the recommendations that I've made to groups of Chinese politicians and businesses that have come to the United States. I've made these presentations to them to advise them. What are the outcomes? Capital formation, financial innovation, efficient allocation of resources, and wealth creation. Higher standards of living at the end of the day. And that will create political stability also. And distribution, the ability to distribute. That's one of the biggest problems is you have concentrations of wealth in a lot of these developing countries. You don't see land distribution. You don't see corporate securities distribution down to the lower rungs of the population to then create wealth and create a middle class at the end of the day. Efficient global real estate markets require a strong financial and legal system based on the enforcement of private property rights and land use restrictions. You need zoning laws. You need zoning. You don't want to be like parts of China and Southeast Asia where you have manufacturing plants right next to the residential communities because of the negative externalities and the pollution that comes over from the manufacturing sectors into the public. So you need land use, and you need zoning restrictions and zoning laws, and you need to be able to enforce those. So the prerequisites for efficient real estate markets is you need market research. This is where you all come in. You need due diligence and risk analysis. You need the acceptance evaluation methodologies and standardized market information. This is the biggest problem when you go global, is here we take advantage, or we take for granted the access to the information that we have, particularly public and private information. You don't have that when you go overseas. You need innovative and enforceable deal structures to be able to put deals together. You need to be innovative sometime, and a lot of times it's based off the tax systems are really the problems in being able to get these deals actually done. You need development capabilities such as land and companies that can actually manage the process. Do you have deep enough and broad enough sectors of the economy with companies that can execute on the development plans, that can actually build the R&D facilities and the manufacturing facilities? Do you have construction companies that can build the roads and the ports to be able to get the goods in and out of the country? Do you have market and distribution domestically but also internationally to push the goods out to? So you need the supply chains. You need public and private mortgage institutions and credit enhancement. Sometimes the private markets cannot provide the mortgage financing because the cost of capital and the uncertainty is too high. So the interest rates are really high on these mortgage funds. So how do you get the cost of capital down? You create mortgage-backed institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in these countries to credit enhance the mortgage-backed securities or back some of the loans that are sitting on the bank balance sheets, so they feel more comfortable lending and more comfortable lowering the cost of capital to then create more loans for capital formation. You need title transfer. You need recordation and title insurance systems in place to be able to track all of the real estate transactions. And that's going to create liquidity. Because if you have the tracking of the title, the ownership, and it's enforced, then the banking institutions are going to feel more comfortable to make the loans. And then you have the banks that come in and pool those loans, they'll underwrite them, securitize them, and then push out the mortgage-backed securities to the savers and the institutional investors and have a circular flow within the economy. Efficient global real estate and security markets require strong institutional investor interest based on clearly defined risks and rewards. We all know that you can't just rely on the retail market, you guys, to create efficient capital markets. You need pension funds, endowments, insurance companies, other financial institutions to be able to create the capital formation, but the institutional investors are not going to invest unless it's very clear to them what the trade-offs are going to be between risk and reward. They got to be able to underwrite it, or else they're not going to come in and they're not going to participate. So you're going to have lower GDP growth rates, and lower standards of living, lower liquidity if the institutional investors' criteria are not met. So who are the institutional investors? Corporations, pension funds, insurance companies, commercial banks, real estate investment trusts, stock mutual funds, family offices. Those are quasi-institutional. What are the institutional investors looking for? What are their underwriting criteria before they deploy any capital or give any capital or make any investments in any financial institutions? Again, you gotta have measurable risks and returns. You gotta have case studies, you gotta have data to be able to do that. You need macroeconomic and local market stability, regional governments, state governments, local governments that are all aligned with each other. You need clearly defined ownership rights and corporate transparency and communication. I'm not gonna build a commercial real estate or logistics facility, in Guangdong province if I don't have, transparency into the corporations who are gonna be the tenants in those facilities. And I'm gonna need communication from those corporations with clearly defined goals, objectives, their financial statements, because I gotta be able to underwrite the credit, or else I'm not gonna be able to get them in there. And if I can't get a good credited tenant in my 1 million square feet logistics facility in Guangdong, I'm not gonna do it. You need portfolio diversification and risk management tools. I gotta be able to not only get the data, but I need to be able to put together the portfolios of properties or securities or fixed income, and to be able to run the optimizations, and to be able to trace out the efficient frontiers, and be able to look at the combinations of how the portfolio is going to be constructed through diversification strategies, which is going to give me some type of risk management tool. And then risk management tools. If I'm moving into a market, I'm going to hedge off the currency risk. Well, if there's currency derivatives or currency swaps or credit default swaps available to me, I can hedge, if the market's liquid enough and backed by financial institutions, then I have some tools available to me to hedge off the macro risks. And then exit strategies. I got positions in these countries, in fixed income, in equity, in real estate. At some point in time, I've already made my money back. I've already, invested over my investment horizon. I'm now ready to exit my strategy. And is there enough liquidity and convertibility of my assets to be able to exit at the institutional level at basically the hundreds of millions or the billions of dollars? Can I get out if I want to get out, or am I trapped? And the ideal is I want to be able to get out. I want to be able to create a capital event and liquidate my position if I have to.
5 minutes.
Okay. And what are the outcomes? Lower information and capital costs. The institutional investors will lower their expected returns, which will lower the cost of capital, which means more capital will be deployed. You'll get increased liquidity and market efficiency. You'll get financial intermediation and innovation. You'll get efficient allocation of resources. And you'll get public and private market discipline and increased social welfare at the end of the day, which is the ultimate, should be the ultimate objective. So what is your role in this process? The role of the global real estate and financial economist? Well, first is the fundamental analysis. You're pulling together all the economic, demographic analysis. You're doing the forecasting using your regression models and your other statistical applications. You're doing market analysis and forecasting. On the technical side, you're using financial market analysis and forecasting. You're using financial engineering and risk management and innovation tools. And if you don't have the tools, the system is in place for you to be able to create the tools that you need to be able to solve the problem that you need to solve. So it all gets down to data and analysis. What is your mission as the research department? To improve the quality of information provided to corporate management and stockholders for decision-making purposes. That's pretty straightforward. The second is to identify economic, demographic, and capital market trends for investment opportunities and portfolio diversification. How am I doing?
4.
Okay. You need to be able to create value through management and stockholder satisfaction. Those are basically your stakeholders. You need to improve the degree of accuracy in the economic, demographic, and capital market forecasts. commitment to improve productivity, quality, and diversity of not only the research, but also the information provided. You need to improve investment and portfolio diversification and yield enhancement through risk mitigation strategies. And then information systems. You need to be able to, you have to have some kind of IT competency, I believe, or have a really, be able to manage IT teams to assure the quality of the information by maintaining a state-of-the-art analytical, computer, hardware, software, database, and reporting system. You have to have your own IT team, basically, or data analytics team. So your role as the individual, this is idealistic, but this is the way I've always approached it, is you act as an independent agent representing the long-term interest of the shareholders through objective and unbiased research. So you might get fired at some point in time based on your ethics. You need to be able to conduct ongoing economic capital market research, providing timely guidance for secondary market investments, initial public offerings, and risk and portfolio management programs. What's your responsibilities? Provide research assistance to corporate management. Analyze portfolios over and under construction, concentration by market, economic base, geographic risks, and conduct portfolio optimization. You need to be able to target markets and investments for future acquisition, underwrite based on fundamental economic demographic demand and capital market dynamics. And you need to maintain the databases and generate and write market research reports on a timely basis. This is the last one. Your global research projects, what do you actually produce? Capital market research reports. You analyze and prioritize target markets and investment for future investments and underwriting. You conduct economic and capital market portfolio diversification, where you measure economic industry concentrations, correlations between employment and investment return trends across capital markets and the investment portfolio. You also conduct portfolio optimization, passive strategies, measuring portfolio diversification against an index that you may actually create, active strategies, portfolio diversification based on required returns, risk tolerance and market constraints, and lastly, future market expansion, where you're analyzing and prioritizing foreign and domestic capital markets and individual company investments, or actually geographic locations, to be able to deploy the capital through either real estate acquisition or development. Okay, there's your roadmap. Okay, that should be your business plan. Oh, I do have some more, but I'll do that one next week. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So